Okay, guys, let's just get into the topic straight away. So, like, tell me, what do you understand by share acquisitions? Like when you say share acquisitions, we're gonna deal with each of the specific terms. All right, going to look at each specific word in that and then try to analyze that. But what do you understand when we say share acquisitions? Yeah, we have a lot of chats. Buying shares, as simple as that. Yeah, acquiring the shares. Unlisted entities. Okay, that's also another thing that we are focusing. Okay, brilliant. Like everyone is aware of that. So it's shares basically. It's not any other security. It's shares. Okay, and it is acquiring shares in some manner, not necessarily buying or not. We'll have a look at that, but it is shares, right? Unlisted entities, which are not listed in the stock exchange, correct? It can be purchasing most or all the shares. Okay, Prashant, very good. To buy shares as a part of investment or to acquire share to have a control over the management. Okay, cool. Okay, let's go along and dissect this. We make laboratories out of the classes, so like how people dissect different things, we're going to dissect this. So let's begin with dissecting the first thing. What is the first thing that we have in this? Share acquisitions. Okay, so what is different when you are saying it's a share acquisition and it's not a business acquisition or an asset acquisition? Okay, so if we distinguish this here, we'll go down from the most specific one to the most comprehensive one. Okay, so if you look at the most specific one, which is asset acquisitions, that means you going to buy or you will choose only very specific assets that you want to purchase rather than the entire business. Okay, you're interested in specific asset that the company has, and you are not interested in buying a whole business out of them, or you are not interested in buying the whole entity out of them. Okay, you don't want to take control over the business. Okay, or you don't want to take control over the entity. You are interested in very specific assets which seem to be useful to you for your business purposes, and you want to acquire only that. Okay, so the transaction document therefore will always list the specific value of the assets that are to be purchased. Okay, specific value of the assets to be purchased will always be listed in the agreement. It will be indicated separately, specifically, that this is the asset that we are purchasing and this is the consideration that we are purchasing it for. That's how it will be listed in the asset purchase agreement. It will be like a list of assets, okay, that you are actually buying from the seller. Okay. Business transfer, a slump sale, it involves purchase of the entire business or of one business vertical. Now, if a company is having lots of different business verticals, okay, and you are buying one vertical out of them, one specific business out of them, then that is also possible. But you are buying the business as a whole. You're not buying one asset that is housed in the business. You are taking that whole area away from the seller. Okay, it involves the purchase of an entire business or a business vertical rather than the specific assets. And now here what is to be taken care of is that people think that in a BTA you will not have separate amounts of the assets listed. That's not how it is. So your total consideration can can allocate or can speak that this is the amount that is allocated out of the consideration to this specific asset, or this amount allocated to this asset. But the negotiation of the consideration as a whole will not be done specifically based on the value of the assets. It's a lump sum consideration for the entire business. Out of that, you assign some value to different assets, it's a different thing altogether. But the consideration will be determined as a lump sum and it will not be based on the separate asset values. Okay. Uh, any questions with that, or any feedback, any points that anyone wants to say versus in the business versus asset acquisitions? And then we'll come to the share part of it. Anyone has any specific question that relates to the business versus asset acquisitions? No questions. Very good. Okay. So that basically, like, is the concept or the idea of both of them. Now, what is a share acquisition? And share acquisition is acquiring the entity which is housing the business. So you take over the entity itself, and you are not taking any specific assets or the business, but you just take over the whole entity. Okay, and I often give this analogy to the students that if you have a box and that box has some items, let's say certain fruits. Okay, so either you take away the fruits, or like, specific fruits out of that box, which will be like an asset acquisition, or you take away the entire contents of the box, which will be like a business transfer, or you take that whole box and you put it in a bigger box that you have. That's like an entity acquisition, because you take, the whole entity or the box which is housing the business. Okay, so the consideration in this case, it is not specifically assigned to assets, or it's not specifically assigned to, that undertaking as such, but it is based on the valuation of the entity as a whole. Okay, and what is the difference is that in an asset acquisition, you will have whatever is the value of the asset as on date. Okay, for business, you might have a bit of a future element taken care of, but in share acquisition, a large part of the valuation will deal with how that business or how the company is expected to fare at a later date. The future prospects will be very, very relevant when the company as such is being acquired. It's not just one specific business, you are acquiring the whole thing. You are taking over the employees, you're taking over the team, you're taking over the assets, you're taking over the liabilities, you are taking over any contracts that they may have signed with clients to be executed in future. Everything you are taking away. Okay, so therefore, it will be a lot of things can be based on the future value. What is the expected profit of the business or expected value of the business? That's what will be very, very relevant when the consideration for the entity as a whole or valuation of the entity as a whole is decided. And then that valuation will be actually divided into a per share value. Okay, and that's how the investment as such will be made. Any questions on this distinction, how consideration is determined? Business means complete business of the entity, while asset is meant to include part of the business. Correct. It will be just a part, and it will actually be only assets. It will not even be part, it will only be specific assets. Can consideration be through royalty? Okay, what do you mean by that, Hemal? Can you explain a little bit more? See, where is royalty paid? Royalty is paid when someone is giving you the technology or some kind of intellectual property someone is giving. That's when you pay royalty. Okay, so now if you are saying that that someone is making a payment not in royalty, so you don't say that the payment is in royalty, but the payment is actually made by provision of technology or intellectual property. Yes, it is possible, very much possible. Okay, one company is using the brand of another company. Well, that's a different transaction. We are talking about acquisitions here, Hemal. So when you are acquiring the shares of an entity and you are making a payment for them, you can make a payment in a non-cash consideration. You can make a payment in terms of intellectual property. then in that case there will be two valuations which will be carried out. So one will be the valuation of the shares of the company and another will be the valuation of the intellectual property, and then that has to match in order for the deal to take place. Okay, so it will not be payment in terms of royalty, but the payment for the shares can be made in terms of a technology transfer or making technology available. Yes, it can be made like that. Okay, in a business transfer, all assets along with liabilities are purchased. Is it so? Yes, that is correct. Everything about the business will be taken. Everything will be taken. Okay. Okay. Uh, any other questions that anyone has? No. Okay, let's proceed. So this is how the concept or the transaction actually takes place, and the consideration, determination of consideration is what we are talking about here. How it is paid is a different question. It can be cash, not cash, different ways. But determining what is supposed to be the consideration, that is what is relevant here. Okay, so in assets, it will be specific values of assets. In a BTA or a slump sale, it will be the valuation of the business as a whole. And in terms of share acquisition, it will be valuation of the entity as a whole. Okay, which is relevant. Okay. So the next now, this is, see, we are dividing each term. So share acquisition. So share versus business versus asset. Acquisitions versus investment. And someone really very clearly put that it has to be like a controlling stake or a dominant stake. Okay, only then you term it as an acquisition. Otherwise, it is a mere investment into the business. Okay. So while investments can be financial, acquisitions are always strategic. Okay. So investments can also be strategic, but they can be financial also. But acquisitions are always strategic. What is the difference? What is the difference? What's the difference between investment and like financial or a strategic point? What is difference between something that's financial and something that is strategic? Investment only looks for financial prospect. Yeah. Okay. So basically, it focuses on what? It focuses on returns, isn't it? Investment is very, yes, it is very return focused. It is very concerned with what is the kind of returns that we're going to get from this investment. And returns, for that matter, need not necessarily mean only in terms of, like, say, dividend of the shares. Okay, that's one part of it, but it also relates with an increase in the valuation that you get. But the intention basically is to be there for a certain period of time. Yeah, like making money from money. Correct, Sonal. So it's being like, being in that for a specific period of time and then selling it, exiting it. And the intention is to make money throughout. Okay. All the time, the intention is to make money throughout. Okay. Acquisition, however, is always strategic, as in it has far more considerations than the making money point. Making money point is always there, and you always, any person who puts money in any entity or anything always wants to make money. No one wants to lose money for sure, but there can be far more considerations for acquisitions rather than just like making money. There can be what is, if you are actually taking over a company and you're going to run it within your own group, house it in your own group, how are you going to be able to run it? Okay, does it add somewhere to your existing business and it makes something available to your existing business? Okay, does it give you an outreach? Many acquisitions are like, based on outreach into geographical areas, outreach into certain type of markets, outreach into a different product line, Okay, loads of acquisitions are like this. Okay, like if you take like the recent, which is most sung over since last some period of time, Byju's versus White Hat Junior. That's what is happening. So it's just an additional market which Byju subsumed within itself. Both of them were catering to students. They were both catering to K-12, right? Kindergarten to 12th standard students. Somehow they were putting them into the coding area. That's what White Hat was doing. So they thought it fit that this can be a very nice addition to the product line which Byju's is providing as such, right? So you will have far more considerations than money in an acquisition. It will always be strategic, so you will look at a lot of different factors for making an acquisition rather than an investment. Okay, so the intention is not to take some percentage stake and returns, but to take the business and run it. Okay, and it necessitates either an outright purchase or it necessitates a dominant stake. Okay, at least you must have a controlling stake in it in order to be able to take it and run it, right? Investments, on the other hand, though having information covenants, do not anticipate actively running the business. Okay, so investor will come that they will ask for information from you because they have put money. So they will definitely ask for certain information which is relevant to them. To know whether this is the right time to exit investment, what to do with it, all of those things. But they will not be worried or concerned really about actively running the business. They'll say, here is the money, you run the business. We don't care, we just want the returns. Okay, that's how investors are. Financial investors are interested in a quick return and can therefore have like return based covenants, while acquirers will take over the management. So when you look at the documents or the transaction documents through which these transactions are given effect to, you will find that financial investors may have a lot of return based covenants. And many people say that I want at least this much return from the investment, else you will buy back my shares at this return, something like that. So you say that if in this period I'm not able to sell off the shares at this much percentage of profit, then the founders need to buy back the shares so that I make the return. Because my focus is that I should be able to get the desired return from the investment, and I'm not really interested with how you are growing or you are not growing. Okay, but acquirers will be interested in managing the business. Like they will want to be concerned with how the business is run, how it is managed as a whole, right? So therefore they will have lot of covenants there which deal with having a control or a takeover of the management of the business. Okay, any questions or any points? Anyone has any feedback, questions in relation to these points? Acquisition versus investment. Anyone has any points on this? No. Let's progress. Unlisted versus listed companies. So we are just taking away all the elements that are surrounding it, and we are going to focus then on share acquisitions in unlisted companies. Okay, so the surrounding concepts of either a business acquisition or an investment, or investments into listed companies, we're just dealing and taking them all away one by one. Okay, so here if you look, unlisted entity acquisitions are largely contract driven, and they are not regulated unless the entity which is being acquired belongs to a regulated sector. So now if you are taking over a company which is, let's say, a broking business, okay, or it's related into some sort of an insurance related business. Now these are all regulated entities, okay, BFIS, or there can be other entities also, but these are regulated entities. So therefore, if there is a change in control in these entities, it requires every time for that entity to go back to the regulator and say that, look, there is going to be a change in control in the entity. But otherwise, if it is just an unregulated sector, which is not like under any specific regulator, then it is largely contract driven. Okay, you will not have a lot of laws dominating how the deal takes place. Okay, what is the size, what is the price, all of these things will not be dictated by regulation. It will be largely contract driven, that what both parties agree as a buy and sell. Okay. Now, purposes behind unlisted entity acquisitions can be many and varied, although usually the purpose is to, like, acquire entities which are on a profit making track. Like I said, no one wants to put an investment or make an investment which loses money, right? Everyone wants to make an investment where ultimately the value of the investment will increase, or they will get some good returns. Okay, that is what anyone wants to make an investment for. Although in some cases people may acquire entities for their people. Okay, so there can be businesses which are loss making, okay, let's say, but the team that is there in that business is excellent and is capable of, like, delivering or capable of generating profit for the entity which is acquiring that. This is very much possible. Like, you can have a really talented team who has run into difficulties, okay, doesn't have the right kind of a network or a right kind of expertise to be able to run the business, but they are indeed very, very talented. Now, if an acquirer is looking at acquiring those kind of skills, they will take over that business, even if it is loss making, because they have the network, they have the expertise or the support that these guys need in order to, like, grow or take the business to the next level. So usually it will be profit, but you can't deny that there can be other considerations why someone is acquiring a business as well, depending upon what is a good fit for the acquirer. Okay, so now, what makes sense for the acquirer? Okay, is it getting anything specific that really makes sense? Okay, if I give you one case, there is a company which was growing and which was looking to be a boutique investment company, right? And they were looking at another smaller entity which was like full of investment analysts kind of thing. And now, what is the thought process of these people? That, if we just hire these guys out, we can start up a portfolio management services business or something straight away with the help of this team with our house. Now, they might not have the resources, or they might not have any, support that is available, but we have the support. And if we get the talented people like that who are capable, okay, who are well known and capable of doing the job, we can start a whole new division within our company itself. So this is how, like, there can be situations where entities acquire another entities which are even at a loss, uh, if there are other considerations which make sense for the acquirer. It all depends on what is a good fit for them. Someone has a comment here. The acquirer can buy an entity just for human resources. Uh, it's not specifically human resources, Uma, but it's a team as a whole. Okay, if they see that there is a talented team, and it's called acqui-hire. Okay, if they see that there is a team which is specialized in something, and that team can entirely run a specific division within the acquirer, yes, they can buy. They can buy it just because of that, because they believe that, the people there will be able to develop a specific business with the help of support from the acquirer, which currently they are not able to because they don't have the kind of support. Yeah, you guys see Shark Tank, right? In that, you see this thing all the time, where these sharks will say that, like, I can give you the network you're looking for or the visibility you're looking for. Now, there will be people who are talented, really talented. They don't have that kind of visibility, or they don't have that kind of access which the larger business has, right? And they can get that. So when they get that, then, like, they can take things to the next level. So that is it. Uh, Listed company acquisitions, on the other hand, they are also based on business intent. So no one like who is taking over a listed company will also be looking to make a loss, right? But then they have to take a regulatory restraint factor in that. And what is a regulatory restraint factor? You will have to make an offer at a specific size. You will have to make an offer at a minimum specific price. Okay, you will have to figure out what you do when people surrender their shares to the offer, when they don't surrender their shares to the offer. All of that you will have to figure out. Which kind of restrictions you don't have. Yeah, the takeover code will apply basically, Neha. That's correct. So that's why you will have restrictions in terms of size, you will have restrictions in terms of price, all of these things you will have to consider, because that is a regulatory provisions on how we operate. So in listed companies you will have to think of that also, that what are the regulatory restraints, and then what if someone else comes out with another offer, because in a listed company acquisition you are not going to have things confidential, right? It's a public announcement of open offer. So someone else will come into the play and they will say, we want to take over the company now. Highly unlikely in case of unlisted entity acquisitions, because you can have something like an exclusivity saying you are not going to go out to seek other people or look at other deals or other acquirers while we are discussing. Okay, but in listed company you can't, because it's a public announcement and someone else can come and make a competitive offer, right? Okay, listed company acquisitions. In listed company acquisitions, there will be more relevance of if someone is already considering or discussing a takeover before they actually make a public announcement. There is already discussions which are taking place. Then at that time, what is the information that they get about the listed company? That's supposed to be kept confidential. Okay, but not the deal itself. In unlisted companies you can keep the deal itself confidential till the very last moment, everything is done and dusted. But in listed companies, when you offer your shares to the public, you have to make a public announcement, so it's out there right in the open. Someone else can make a competitive announcement if they want. Okay. So you have to think of that also, that what will you do, or what are the considerations or chances of someone else coming in making a competitive announcement. Okay. Yeah, so they involve far more time and expense than unlisted company acquisitions, but they can have an impact on the price, the share price of the company, which will ultimately impact the general public, right? So once there is a public announcement, it is bound to impact the share price, right? There's a certain price that is offered by the acquirer. It is highly unlikely that it will not impact the share price of the target company, current share price of the target company. It will, right? So it impacts the general public as such. Okay. Uh, any questions or any points on this? Anyone has any points that they want to share? Any questions that they want to ask on this unlisted versus listed companies acquisitions? And in listed company acquisitions, if you're actually acquiring it as a whole, you can have dual regulations applied to it, the takeover as well as the delisting regulations. Okay, if you're going to be taking it private, you will delist it. In case of unlisted companies, the valuation of shares has to be carried out through a registered valuer or a merchant banker. Yeah, but in case of listed companies, there's a whole formula that is put down by the takeover code, and you have to comply with that, right? So there is a greater restriction on how you price it, right? Registered valuers or merchant bankers can also consider the future prospects and determine the price based on that. But in a listed company takeover, you don't have that kind of flexibility at all. You will have to look at what are the prices that are there according to the formula. You have to put that down, and you have to choose the highest price from that, okay, as the minimum price. Okay. So steps to a share acquisition, and this is Specific to unlisted companies, also we are looking at in terms of the first time that the shares are acquired. So we are like generally looking at cases where a new investor is coming in and taking it over from the founders directly, not from the founders as well as investors. So approach, this is very relevant. So usually you will find that acquirer, who is the person who wishes to acquire or who is looking to have a dominant stake, will approach the management of the target entity. Okay, it will not be the target entity approaching the acquirer. That is also a difference in terms of investment. In terms of investment, you will largely find the founders approaching the investors. Okay, in an acquisition, it is also possible, although, that the founders are approaching an entity in order to be acquired, if they are in such a state and they are looking to be acquired by someone else. Okay, they want to be acquired, then founders can also be approaching uh, specific entities which are likely to acquire them. But largely, it will be the acquirer who has identified that this entity is a proper fit for me and I want to acquire this entity, or it will be very well combined with my business. It will give me an outreach, it will give me certain things I'm looking for. Acquirer will approach the target entity, okay, because they believe that that entity is a very specific fit, and then obviously the target entity can accept or decline, or they can negotiate. All of these things can happen, but largely the acquirer will approach the target entity. Okay, while in terms of investment, it is usually the investee who will approach the investor. Okay, although there have been instances of companies which are so much on a growth track that they just go and they'll say to the investors that uh, we are looking for this much investment, things like that. Okay, they'll kind of dictate the terms there. So approach will be usually by an investee to investor, but an acquirer to a target. Okay, uh, and we are not looking for hostile acquisitions in unlisted entities. In unlisted, you can really not find hostile acquisitions taking place where the management is not willing, because it's the management who is going to divest the stake. Now, if they are not willing to proceed forward, then how are you going to really enter into the business of the company and take it over in a hostile manner? It's not possible, because the stake is not held by public; it is held largely by the management or the existing investors. So, like in that, a hostile takeover or a hostile acquisition is not possible. However, there can be situations where leading investors kind of dominate the will of the founders and want to sell over the company to someone else. To that extent, you can say that it's a bit hostile to the founders, because the leading investor is kind of calling the shots and they want to just sell the entity. Okay, they have put a huge amount of money, they lead the consortium of the investors, and they want to sell the entity off, irrespective of whether the founders want or not, because founders have a very minimum stake. Okay, now this is possible that there is an element of hostility involved here, and they kind of proceed to sell off the company to the external investors. But other than that, like usually you will not find, and that's also possible where you have things like drag along clauses, which are really dangerous in a shareholders agreement. Okay, so usually hostility will not be there with unlisted companies. It can be in listed company cases, but it will not be there in case of unlisted entity. Term sheets. Term sheets, again, like I'm saying, it will usually come from an investor where the company is looking for investment. Okay, or an acquirer where the acquirer is looking to put the money into the entity. Whoever is putting the money basically is kind of the person who will dictate the terms or will lay down the terms. But what happens is that if the companies or the investee entities are really strong enough, then they can also negotiate, and they can also have terms in the term sheet which are very very favorable to them. It depends on what is the balance of power, or what is the negotiation of power between both the sides. Okay, so that's what goes down into the term sheet. And then obviously, if someone is putting money, there will be a due diligence that is carried out. The greater the stake, the more the depth of the due diligence, right? Because you want a really huge stake into an entity, you're going to check everything, and you want to ensure that your investment is going to the right place. So, and if it is a really limited amount of investment, which is not an acquisition, then it will not be like an in-depth due diligence. Certain things you will check in order to ensure that your investment is going to get the returns. But any kind of equity investment, and we are talking of shares, okay, shares can be equity or preference, but largely equity investments involve an element of risk. So you will take some degree of risk, for sure you will be taking a risk. Yeah. What is a question or a comment here? In the recent case of Amazon versus Future Group, can it be considered as a lapse of due diligence by Reliance? I'm not really aware of the details of this, Hemal. I haven't followed this case that thoroughly. Okay, so I can't comment on this at the moment, but the depth of due diligence will be dependent upon what is the stake that is involved, and the other point or the other relevant factor is that there is still going to be risk as far as any kind of equity investment is concerned. Despite doing all the due diligence, you do not know where the business is going to take a turn. It can take a turn unexpectedly for the better, it can take a turn unexpectedly for the worse. Okay, and equity always carries that kind of risk. So, like, you will do the most comprehensive due diligence on earth that is possible, but at the end of the day, you still take a risk. Okay, when you are investing in equity, you take a risk, and it's not risk free. It is if you want to go risk free, then you will do debt, you will not do equity. Okay, so that's about the due diligence and the comprehensiveness of the due diligence. Okay, so now once you are through that stage, obviously you will go into the approval stage, because you want both the entities, managements and owners to approve it. So the board and the shareholders of both the entities have to say yes, okay, go ahead, for the investor, for the acquirer to go ahead and acquire, for the target entity to go ahead and get acquired or be acquired. Okay, so there will be very specific approvals at each stage for the board and the shareholders. Those approvals will then be brought into place, and it may not be acted immediately, but in unlisted entities, usually things tend to move very, very fast, because it is not supposed to be dependent on someone else's approvals. Okay, and it is largely contract driven. So you will always have everything bottom lined very clearly. You will have the term sheet, you will have like your due diligence period, you will have a draft of an agreement, everything ready, and you just kick it off and start executing it after that. Okay, so your approvals will be relatively very, very fast in terms of unlisted entities. Most entities will have very short uh, gaps between board and shareholders meetings, and they will take a consent for a shorter notice and progress and get all the approvals in place. Okay, if it is not a regulated entity, if it is regulated, of course the additional element of getting an approval of the regulator comes into place. But if it's not, then it's just internal approvals that are required to be taken. It will move very fast. Okay, transaction documents, then these are the exact documents that will be executed. So now your what the documents through which the transaction is actually taking place. okay, through which the shares are being sold or being subscribed. We'll come to that, what happens after that. But the transaction document actually will then be entered into, executed, done and dusted after the approval is in place. Okay, and then you naturally progress to complete the transaction, okay, in terms of how it is agreed in the transaction document. Okay, there will be a payment of consideration, and there will be transfer or the issue of shares, as is the case, because we are talking share acquisitions. So there has to be a transfer, or there has to be an issue of shares, something has to be, okay, where the shares are given to the acquirer, right? So that, and the acquirer will make a payment. Payment can be in cash, non cash, whatever manner both of them have agreed to do it. But it will be the payment actually of the consideration and the transfer or the issue of shares. And then post completion compliance, whatever filing you required, whatever changes you need to require to make in or in your registers, whatever changes you need to make in your accounts, okay, all of these things will be taken care of. And then once the transaction is completed, everything is done and dusted, then you will only have things which are an ongoing monitoring, okay, of the covenants in the transaction documents, because many transaction documents will have ongoing covenants. Okay, it will not be stopped that once the payment of consideration is made, everything is over. So, like, the transaction is over and it's completed, so fine, it's the expiry of the transaction document. That's not how it will be. There will be ongoing covenants that are there in the documents, which can relate to information, which can relate to non-compete, which can relate to, let's say, lock-in or stopping the transfer of shares, which can relate to having someone on the board on an ongoing basis, things like this. Okay, so ongoing monitoring and implementation of the covenants in the transaction documents has to take place and continue until there is something else which is entered into, which overrides everything in the transaction document. So let us say now in an even bigger investor or acquirer is coming into place. Okay, so they will enter into a new document and that will override everything that is there here, because they will buy away everybody's stake. So that kind of thing can also happen, right? Will warranties be considered as ongoing covenants? Warranties, yeah, to an extent, because you are confirming or you are warranting to you are warranting to the acquirer, or your both parties maybe are warranting to each other certain things, and therefore if there is something that doesn't go ahead in accordance with that warranty, then at a later stage there will be some disputes, or there will be issues in relation to the breach of the warranty. Okay, so therefore definitely it will be an ongoing, or it will be something that requires monitoring. But warranties can be something like a one time thing. It may not be on an ongoing or a long continuing basis. Okay, so there can be a term, or there can be something that saying that we warrant that these kind of things or these kind of changes will not happen, or you don't have you are not likely, or you don't have anything that is going to come up, any claim that is going to come up because of this. Now if you've been carrying on the business for a long period of time, there may or may not be any claims or anything that comes up. Yeah, but these, what the ongoing covenants that I'm talking about are more related to, let's say, the ownership, okay, of the business particularly, or someone else starting another business, things like that, because these are very very crucial covenants. Okay, so saying that if there is a lock-in in the agreement that the founders are not going to transfer their shares for, let's say, X number of years, and they actually enter into a transfer, or that they will not start any competing business to this for this much period of years, and then they actually start a competing business. These are very, very relevant covenants for someone to continue doing the business as an acquirer. Therefore, like, that is, uh, it is very much necessary that there is an ongoing monitoring and the implementation of governance. Okay, like that. So term sheet, like we are coming back to the first step. We already talked about approach and how approach happens. Uh, Term sheet is largely understood as a non-binding document. So both of them will kind of just agree to certain terms, that this is the amount of investment, this is the number or the type of shares that will be allotted to the investor or transferred in favor of the investor, whatever it is. Uh, these will be the basic conditions. These will be the points where you need to seek the consent. This will be the rights, like, that you have. This is what is going to happen post acquisition. All of those things might be put down in a term sheet on a non-binding basis. And what happens is that people usually take this as, that it's going to be non-binding. So how does it matter? Like, I can, they will say that, okay, agree to these terms right now, and we can change it later, because it's going to be, because it is non-binding, we can negotiate and change it later. But it should not ideally be left casually, because once someone has kind of discuss the terms and then put them down onto a document and signed it. Okay. Even though you also sign it stating that this term sheet is expected to be non-binding, even though you actually write it, making someone go back on that and then change it. Okay, this is kind of like, it becomes very difficult to convince and renegotiate everything and change the terms. So therefore, even if you should make a term sheet such that it's nearly what you want in terms of, the final transaction documents, and you're not looking to make any significant changes to that. Some very minimal things can be changed, but the really crucial terms you negotiate thoroughly, and only then you put it into the term sheet, such so that, like, it is taken directly from there onto the transaction document. You do not leave the negotiation out at the point of term sheet. You thoroughly negotiate first, then you bottom line the term sheet, so that, large part of it can get into the transaction documents. So you don't leave space for a lot of negotiation between the term sheet and the final transaction document. Okay. Um, Certain clauses such as exclusivity and confidentiality can indeed have a binding effect. This is very much necessary because, like, having the deals publicized can create issues, or, like, can make problems. Although in some cases both the parties might even want to publicize, because, they want their suppliers, their consumers, everyone who is the stakeholder with that particular business to know that, okay, we are affiliated to this, or that we have purchased this onto our fold also, so that now we have a wider capacity. They may even want to publicize it in case of unlisted companies. Okay, so they may decide to, in case of listed companies, anyway, it is going to come out because there are disclosure requirements like that. But in case of unlisted companies, they may even want to publicize that, saying that, so that the people who are surrounding or doing business with those unlisted entities come to know about that deal, and might even give better points, or might even give brownie points on the basis of that specific deal which is going to take effect. Okay, but if they want to keep it confidential and exclusive, then they will have that also as a binding term, that the fact that we are going to enter into a transaction also we will keep confidential. Okay, so that, we don't have implications that we don't want at the moment. Okay, and it will be in unlisted companies, typically it will be very confidential even at the top level. Okay, so not even all employees of these companies will know that. Okay, it's highly unlikely that many employees will come in a listed company. There are chances that a lot of employees come to know that that deal is going to happen, because, like, someone is involved in actually drafting that announcement, someone is involved in, like, filing that, someone is involved in doing all, even the little tasks that are there. So, like, there are very much chances that in listed companies more people know about it, as compared to unlisted companies. It can be kept restricted only to, like, the top management or certain people that a deal is being planned. Okay, so exclusivity and confidentiality will have binding effects between the two parties, and they may not let out the things very early. Also, because see, these kinds of things can fail. So you go out too early and publicize stuff, and then the deal actually doesn't get through. So it kind of, like, it reflects not too good on both the parties for that matter. Okay. Um, so term sheet is often dictated by investors, like I said, barring exceptional cases, where companies can go to investors and say, here is a term sheet, invest in us if you want, take it or leave it, or we'll go to another investors. There can be that kind of profit making companies who will dictate the terms in a term sheet as well. Now, acquirers will thoroughly negotiate and arrive at the term sheet because the stake involved is substantial. So, therefore, there will be a lot of, like, considerations that they want to put into the term sheet. And agreements regarding the control over ownership and management of the business will lead the terms in an acquisition term sheet, rather than the conditions relating to return of investment or information covenants or affirmative voting covenants, which are there in an investment related term sheet. Okay, acquisition will be like we take over, you become our employees, that kind of thing. Okay, that's the kind of thing that the acquisition will have. Any questions in this on term sheet? Anyone has anything interesting to share about term sheets? Anything interesting about term sheets, or anyone has any specific questions? Yeah. Can term sheets have validity? Yes, they do have validity. Yeah, they do have validity. Cost of stamp duty should be part of term sheet. Term sheet doesn't have any stamp duty. So you were saying that stamp duty in terms of the transaction that's going to happen. And who is going to pay the stamp duty? That's what. Who is going to bear the stamp duty on the transaction? Where it is a huge stake that is going to happen in terms of stamp duty, lots of stamp duty that is relevant, then yeah, you will have it. And this will be very relevant when you are going for a business transfer. Okay, stamp duty will be significant when you are going for a business transfer. As far as the share transfer is concerned, it is kind of uniform, because you will have, like, that 25.25% which is there, which is your share transfer stamp duty. So that's what is really relevant in terms of a share transfer. But yes, where it is significant, usually you will have transferors bear the stamp duty. Usually that is the case. Okay, in case of the terms agreed in the term sheet are in contravention to the following agreement, can the party sue the other on the basis of discussion in the term sheet? No. It's usually non-binding, and all term sheets mostly will have a clause that the final transaction document that you entered into, which is like a signed agreement, will supersede everything in the term sheet. Okay, that is always you a part of the term sheet, where the provision will be that the final transaction document will supersede everything in the term sheet, and whatever is the in the final document, that is what will stand. Okay, once that document is signed. Okay, is there any other questions? Term sheets can have validity. Yeah, they will have validity because people want to close the deals by a certain period of time. So they will say that, it will stay for a period of this months, or until the transaction document is entered into, whichever is valid. Now, if the transaction document is not entered into, things are ongoing for a very long period of time and the deal is getting delayed, and now one of the parties wants out to it. So then that's a limit. It will be valid up to that point of time, and then it will not be valid anymore after that. Okay, if the deal is significantly getting delayed. Okay, any questions on this? Validity of term sheet? We actually dissect and discuss live term sheets of investors in the M&A course. It's a very interesting exercise. I love that, when people actually, yeah. Okay, let's move forward. So due diligence, yeah, this is a banker, and we were talking about due diligence. Term sheet perhaps is not required in cases the acquisition is under NCLT orders or Government of India orders. Yeah, so here we are talking, Subhash, here we are talking about share acquisition, which is like absorption completely. Okay, so you are not just taking over a certain percentage of the shares of the entity, you are merging the entity into yourself. Okay, the shares of that entity are no longer going to remain because that entity is no longer going to remain. You're only going to issue your shares as generally as a consideration for the shares of that entity, and then the shares of that entity will be cancelled completely, like that entity will dissolve under the acquisition for NCLT. So it's not a share acquisition that we are talking about. It's a complete merger, it's an absorption of the entity itself, when you're talking of NCLT, or it's a merger in terms of government orders or whatever. Okay, so that is not really share acquisition, that's just like an absorption of the entire entity itself. Share acquisition, we are talking about cases where that entity lives, it is ongoing, it's going to live. Okay, it's not going to dissolve. NCLT is where that entity is going to dissolve, you are merging it, right? Okay, due diligence. Acquisition due diligence will be, like I said, far more thorough and in depth in case of investment due diligence, naturally, because you will look at a lot of different things. So it can spread over the business due diligence. It will definitely include financial due diligence. It will include legal due diligence. It will include management due diligence. It can include operational due diligence also. What are the processes or operations that you are, how are you carrying out your operations? Okay. So business basically is obviously that what is the relevance of this business in this market. Okay, what are the prospects of this specific business, who are the competitors, what is the percentage of the share that of the market that this business has. Okay, all of these things will be considered in terms of business, in terms of the viability. Financial, naturally, people will think of what is the turnover, what are the profits, what are the prospective profits that this business is likely to have. Okay, what are its expenses, what is the liquidity that this business has. Okay, is it having a huge amount of a sunk cost, what is the operational element of the cost. All of these things will be checked in financial due diligence. Legal, naturally you will check that what are the legal permissions this business is required, and does it have those permissions to keep on going. What are the litigations that this business has. Okay, how many people have filed a suit against it, what stages are those suits at. Has this company filed litigation against or initiated litigation against someone or some entity, and what stage does that litigation at. Okay, uh, also in legal you will look at what are the other entities in the structure. Okay, and then what is the relationship between this entity which is getting acquired and the other entities in the structure. What are the transactions between them, what are the dealings. All of these things can be taken care of in the legal aspects. Management due diligence, obviously people want to know who is managing this business, who are the people, who are the leading people, the key people of this business, what is their background. Okay, so if we're going to continue them, then How capable are they to run the business? Okay, all of these things will be taken care of in the management due diligence. Operational area. So how are the, what is the model at which this business is operating? What are, how are the operations ongoing of the business? Okay, is there any specific process that these people are running through? How are the systems inside the business, or is everything running haywire and on the fly, and things can be changed at the drop of a hat? How is it continuing on an operational basis? Okay, all of these things will be checked when you are doing, like, this amount of a comprehensive due diligence. Okay, significant red flags in a due diligence report can become a deal breaker. I think, Hemal, this was one of your questions. But yes, if there are red flags which make an acquirer really, really suspicious, it can become a deal breaker and it can result in the transaction being called off. Okay, it is very much possible. Okay, so yeah, due diligence can contribute to making or breaking the deals. Okay, and this will be like a considered or a calculated choice. Now, if there is something which can be fixed, like I've written, then the transaction documents will be drawn with the condition precedent that those things be fixed before the transaction actually takes effect. So, as an acquirer, if you are foreseeing that the business is likely to have significant growth, okay, but there are some operational things which need to be cured. There are some record keeping aspects that need to be cured. Okay, these things you will discuss with the management, and you will want those fixed or brought into place before you can actually proceed for the transaction to take effect. But on the whole, you are seeing that that acquisition is going to be profitable, so you will proceed with it, right? Any questions on this? Abel, here you were talking about due diligence for Reliance and Future Group. What do you mean by that? Can you throw the light on that? I would like you to speak up. Is Abel here?
Hey ma'am, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, the voice is a little bit cracking.
I'm really sorry. Actually, there seems to be some issue, actually, ma'am. Hello, ma'am, can you hear me?
Yeah, it is still cracking. Just wait one sec. I'll just take this headphone off. Maybe that will be better. Yes, Abel. So I'll just increase the volume to the full, and you can tell me now. Yeah, tell me.
Ma'am, can you hear me now properly?
Yeah, that's a little bit better. Tell me.
So, ma'am, here's the thing. Recently, Amazon, no, I'm sorry, Amazon filed a case against Future Group stating that since there was a non-compete clause in the agreement which stated that the Future Group was not allowed to sell his stakes to any other company without the permission of Amazon without the permission of Amazon, and Future Group still did that. So when Reliance acquired it, it was very widely stated over the news report that it is an complete lapse of due diligence on the part of Reliance. So I just wanted to understand that is it exactly a part of lapse on the part of Reliance, or is it something else that we're really looking ahead at?
Yeah, so this is the thing, Hemal. So you will be looking at a lot of contractual clauses. When an acquirer takes over, they will be looking at lots of contractual clauses that are there in relation to the target entity. Now, if you have missed out and you haven't really considered certain contractual clauses, and the target entity has gone on and made a confirmation to you that there is nothing that is going to stop this deal, so it will be on both the sides, isn't it? Like, naturally, the acquirer will ask for a confirmation from the target entity that there is nothing that is going to stop this deal. That part of the representation also is there. Okay. Setting up of data center containing all records of company relevant for proposed would facilitate. Well, yeah, it's a different direction, Subhash, that we are looking at, and I'll come to a data center or a data room where that is really really relevant. Okay, so uh, so Hebel, it will be on both the sides. Okay, acquirer or Reliance will also have asked for a confirmation from Future Group that there is nothing or there is no clause that they have entered into, or there is nothing in the contract that they have entered into which will stop this deal. Okay. So if they have given that kind of a confirmation, and that is one of the conditions precedent to the transaction. Okay, so it states that now if they confirm that there is nothing which is going to stop this deal, and that's a condition precedent to the transaction. So the acquirer proceeded on that basis. And now if that was not the case, if the condition precedent breaks, okay, if the condition precedent is not fulfilled or completed, then very clearly the contract will not take effect as such. Okay, so always the acquirer will seek this kind of confirmations from the target entity, and the target entity can provide those confirmations. Again, how things are drafted in terms of language also become very very relevant here, because there can be really wide or kind of vague confirmations like to the best of our knowledge or things like that. So, you have to be very careful what is the kind of language that you're getting in terms of conditions precedent when the target entity is saying that there is nothing that will stop, or we are not aware of anything that is going to stop this acquisition, or comes in the midst of, or requires a prior approval of or consent of before we proceed to surrender, or before the acquirer proceeds to take over the shares. Okay, these confirmations are very very relevant in the deal. Okay, so due diligence definitely is the case where people will look at the legal contracts of the target entity, but also the confirmation by the target entity also comes into question, because it confirmed and said that there's nothing. Okay, so that is also a factor that you will consider. So future group, if future group came over and confirmed to Reliance that we don't have any contracts or any covenants, we have not signed any covenants that can, like, stop this deal, then yeah, future group is the one that needs to be blamed, right? Does that answer your question, Hemal? So together with due diligence also there will be the confirmations by the target entity which are relevant. Okay, so Subhash was mentioning about data rooms. These are really relevant where you have multiple people who are out to acquire that entity. Okay, that then your data room becomes really really relevant, because you want to show some things to someone as they have requested. You don't want to show something to the other acquirer who has requested. Now in managing that, the data room provides a lot of benefits. But otherwise, if it is a simple unlisted company acquisition, where you have a due diligence that is being conducted by a firm or a consultant, in most cases you are able to go ahead without the use of a data room, because at best what you can do is you will set an FTP, like you will set up a dedicated space where you will upload the stuff. It is very much easy or possible in terms of the likes of Google Drives or all. They're a little bit less secured, so you will want, or maybe you will want to secure it in terms of some FTP transfer or things like that, but you might want to set up specific places where those documents are actually put up. Okay, and you can put it in terms of security. Data room will be relevant, will might turn out to be expensive for where it is a one acquirer one target entity kind of deal. It's not a lot of different things. Or even if the target entity is spread at a lot of different places, then data room will be relevant. Okay, like it is a company which is unlisted nevertheless, but has branches or subsidiary companies across the country. Now data room will be very relevant, because you want to put all the details of these companies, also the subsidiary entities which come with that acquisition. Okay, so then in where there is multiple things like this, the data room will be relevant. But if it's a one acquirer, one entity acquisition, usually people don't incur that cost, and they find out secure methods of transferring data in another ways. So does that answer your question, Subhas, or your point? What is the difference between SSA, SPA, SHA? I guess the crowd here is aware of these aspects. Anyone who is not aware, because share subscription naturally results like, it's a subscription to new shares that are created. A share purchase is a purchase of existing shares, and a shareholders agreement is an agreement which talks of inter se rights between the shareholders. Anyone has any questions or any points or any confusion in the difference between SSA, SPA, SHA? Anyone has any questions here? No. Okay, very good. Let's proceed to the next. Share purchase agreement, share subscription agreement. Uh, in this, what happens? These are like, your real transaction documents. Okay. So share purchase agreement will result in the payment going to the owners of the shares. Because they are already holding the shares, so it will be founders or previous investors who are already there, they are holding the shares. Those shares are purchased by the acquirer, and therefore the payment will be made to the holders of the shares, the founders or the previous investors. Okay, and it does not result in creating any new shares, it is just the existing shares changing ownership and changing hands. Okay. Share subscription agreement, on the other hand, results in the payment going to the company and increasing its capital. Okay, because you subscribe to the shares of the company and you make a payment for that subscription to the company. So it goes to the company's account. Okay, and it increases the capital of the company because it's a payment towards the shares of the company. Okay. Any questions on this? Any points on this? So share subscription agreement necessarily creates additional shares, and therefore it necessitates availability of the shares in the authorized capital. Okay, what is the authorized capital? The maximum number of shares that the company is authorized to issue. So naturally it has to allow for these additional shares which are going to be allotted to the investor. Okay. Shareholders agreement, on the other hand, uh, is something that will always accompany a SPA or SSA. Okay, or it can be combined also. Will be share purchase and shareholders agreement, share subscription and shareholders agreement, a combined agreement. Because most certainly there will be changes to the rights of the shareholders inter se. Okay, and the company used to be held by the founders or founders plus early investors, but now it is seeing external people who are coming in and they are going to have a stake in the company. So there will definitely be some kind of readjustments of the rights of these people. Okay, because the control is now changing hands, so therefore there will always be some readjustments of the rights that the shareholders have. So that's why you need a shareholders agreement in place, and it is even necessitated where there is a 100% acquisition of stake. Because now someone will say that, why do I need to readjust any kind of rights? I take over the entire shareholding of the company, so now I have the 100% rights, and I don't need to adjust anybody's rights with anything at all. Okay, so that's the kind of, like, you will say that 100% acquisition of stake. Even in that cases, you want to fix some liabilities or fix some stuff that was there before the transaction and after the transaction. So if you kind of say that, okay, I take over the entire control of the company, and now something that was related to before the transaction comes and bugs you after you have taken 100% acquisition, what is the recourse that you go to the former founders or controllers who sold the company to you? This is where the company is sold, right? So how do you go to the former owners or the sellers? You have to have a document in place saying that if there is something that comes up at some point of time, okay, even though I'm acquiring 100% stake, anything that relates to before this acquisition of stake comes up at a later date and bugs me, then you are responsible for that. Okay, so that kind of clauses will necessitate that even if there is 100% acquisition of stake, you still entered into the shareholders agreement. And non-compete clauses, very very relevant. This is the one exception if people know from out of, like, the contract act, which talks of, restraint on trade, where you have, people always have this kind of a point that non-compete versus agreement in restraint of trade, where does it stand? It's like a long standing and ongoing thing, but this is an express exception to that, where the business is sold, okay, by a seller, that it's entirely sold by the seller, and now they are going up and starting a competing business because they know everything that's there in the business, okay, and the new person is taking it. He's, even after taking that business, he will not get any value because these people are going ahead and starting something that's completely parallel. They have the network, they have the contacts, they have the expertise. They're going to pose a huge threat to this person who has just bought that business. So it's an express exception that, if it is sold, you can include non-compete clauses in cases where the business is entirely sold. So you will say that you will not carry on the same business or a competing business for X number of years until the sale, after the sale has happened. Okay, because if you provide for that period of time, then yeah, everything, things will start changing. Customers will start changing. Suppliers will start changing. Industry practices will start changing. So after a certain period of time, you can let the former owners carry on competing business because it's not going to come and cause a dent to the business that you have just purchased. Okay, but it is still necessary even in case of 100% acquisition of stake, okay, for these purposes. Now, shareholders agreement contains, largely it is ownership and management related covenants. So you will not transfer your shares, you will transfer your shares to me first. If you go out and sell to a third party, you must take my stake also. All of these ownership related and transfer related provisions. If you issue additional shares, you must take my consent, or you must issue the shares to me first, then you go to someone else. Things like that. So basically, wherever there is chance of ownership changing hands, you will find all clauses related to that into the shareholders agreement. And then management related covenants, of course, like before taking one, two, three, four, five decisions, you will take my consent. My nominee will be there on your board. He has to vote positively on one, two, three, four, five decisions before you go ahead with it. Your board cannot constitute a quorum without my nominee remaining present. All of these things are management related covenants. Okay, and these will always be there because the acquirer is taking a strategic stake. They want to run the business, okay, and they might even provide it that it's an equal number of directors or even a higher number of directors until we are holding this much of stake, things like that. Okay, so all management related covenants will be there. And here is one question that always people will say: the shareholders, stamping of shareholders agreement. Okay, if it's a separate shareholders agreement, how is it stamped? Anyone wants to comment on this? I have written that it's that of same as that of an agreement, because shareholders agreement per se, if it's individually written, it doesn't involve any consideration. Your consideration is actually taken in the subscription or the purchase transaction. The shareholders agreement is just a realignment of rights. Okay, although it forms a part of the transaction documents, it of itself doesn't result in any transfer or conveyance or anything like that. Okay, it is just a realignment of rights that is happening. So it's an agreement at the end of the day. And in the state specific laws or the schedules, whatever is the duty that you find for an agreement, that is what gets applicable to the shareholders agreement. Okay, and where you have indemnity clauses, so naturally where indemnity requires a separate stamp duty, you will add that also. Some people even have the practice of adding the amount of the agreement one more time. Okay, because they'll say that if there is arbitration clause in that agreement, so we add one more time, but like that may not necessarily be required, because at the end of the day it's an agreement, that's it. Okay, but indemnity, people add the value of the stamp duty that is applicable to indemnity in addition to that what is applicable to an agreement. Any questions on this? Any questions on this? On the stamp duty? Surprising. Stamp duty otherwise generally gets a lot of questions. Receipt of consideration and completion. Okay, so the consideration can be cash or shares, or it can be royalty, like not royalty but intellectual property or technology transfer, like Hemal mentioned, can be cash or shares, and the cash element will be transferred to the bank account of the company. And if it is the shares, then the shares will be offered. Now, in the new company, usually it will not be a transfer; it will be new shares which are offered as a consideration to, to the shares of the promoters being transferred, or the shares being allotted as a new subscription. Okay, then these will be transferred or allotted, and uh, new share certificates can be provided, or the demat accounts of the acquirer will be credited with additional shares. Unlisted companies now are required to have electronic holdings, so therefore you can also find unlisted public companies having electronic shareholder. Yeah, thanks, Anumita. It's fine. So, allocation to the demat accounts will be there. Updates to the register of members of the target company will take place, because naturally the new acquirers will be listed as the shareholders or the members of the target company. And then if it is electronic holding, then there will be updates to the beneficial ownership. Okay. Conditions subsequent will necessitate compliance. So you have, a requirement to file the necessary forms in case of creation of new shares, the requirement to update the register in case of transfer of shares. Okay. Amendment to the memorandum and articles. Now, if the acquirer is actually taking over the company and changing everything, they may add some aspects to the business of the target entity. Okay, and in which case you will need the memorandum to be amended also, because the objects clause will undergo a change. And they may also change the name. They are acquiring a dominant stake. They may decide to change the name of the company. Okay, and they may want to bring their own name into this company as a group. Okay, so change of name will also necessitate a change in the memorandum. Articles of association of the company definitely will be changed, because whatever are the provisions in the shareholders agreement, those will be incorporated into the articles of association of the company. Okay, so changes as the acquirer desires and dictates, or as agreed into, the shareholders agreement. Changes in the name and registered office of the company, if that is what is happening, the acquirer is taking over, and they want to change the registered office of the company, then that changes will have to be filed. Changes to the board of the company, if the acquirer is bringing on new people onto the board, not only the articles will be changed, but there will have to be filing which is required for the board of the company also to be given effect. So all of these things can take place after the transaction. Can an acquisition involve the issue of new shares? Because typically we take acquisition as an acquisition of something that is already there. Okay, but when we are talking of acquisition of shares, it can also be the case that the existing holders are holding certain number of equity shares. Now, the external investor or the acquirer is coming in and putting the money at a huge number of issue of the equity shares. So, although they may not be buying the shares of the existing owners, still by issue of new shares, now the new shareholding pattern that is created will reflect a dominant stake of the acquirer and a very small stake of the existing owners. So, yeah, it can be done by the issue of new shares. Also, you are paying consideration for the new shares for taking over or dictating, like the shareholding pattern or the stake in the business. So it can be by issue of new shares also. Any questions on this? How acquisition can involve issue of new shares? Right now, let us assume the founders or investors, whoever that is in control of the company, is holding 10,000 shares. Now the new person, new guy is coming in and putting in 90,000 shares. So now if you look at the shareholding pattern post the investment, what is going to happen is that the new investor will have 90% stake, the existing person will have 10% stake in the business. So effectively, it is a control of the business now by the new person, even though by issue of new shares they are taking it over. Okay. Any questions on this? Any questions on this? Compliance required in the case of a transfer. You will have an execution of share transfer form with the required stamping, which, as I said, is 0.25% of the consideration that is being paid. Uh, or if it is electronic shareholding, you are out of the stamp duty requirements. You simply deliver an instruction to the depository participant to transfer the electronic holdings to the acquirer. And there has to be a resolution approving the transfer. There has to be an inscription of transfer on the existing share certificates saying transfer to the acquirer on so and so day and authorized by a particular official. Okay. No filing is required for share transfers, but it will reflect in the annual return of the company whenever it is filed next. Compliance required in the case of a private placement. Yeah, you have like a good deal of filings to take place, to take care of in this case. Okay, so you need board resolutions for each stage of enabling private placement, making an offer and allotment of shares. All each stage you will need a separate board resolution which is backing this. Okay, you can make these two together, enabling private placement or making an offer, like whenever it takes place, but allotment you will need another board resolution. Okay, so special resolution for enabling the private placement. And I will like to just draw the sections here for the people. These are the relevant sections. 42, section 42 of the Companies Act, and rule 40, okay, of the company's share capital and debentures rules. Okay, so it's a huge one. Sorry, prospectus and allotment of securities, pass rules, my mistake. So rule 14 of that. Okay, these are the two things that are relevant for private placements. So you can look at that. Then you have your offer come application form, which is to be sent to the investor, and you will complete and file a report of the preferential allotment or private placement rather in form PAS 5. You will file a return of allotment for allotment of shares, and at the end, you will have the issue of share certificates or the credit to the electronic accounts of the investor. Okay. Any questions in this? We have an exercise here. How many of you are willing to take some part? Because this is supposed to be a workshop. So if it's a workshop, we have to do something hands-on, or we have to have people contribute to this. Okay, and this is the kind of exercises that we have in our courses. So like this is one, Diligent Health Counseling Private Limited. Yeah, we'll try. Which has been incorporated in November 2017, runs a portal called Guide to Health. Yeah, which allows patients to book doctor consultations online, ensure delivery of prescription medicines, and also provide a health counselor who can guide on appropriate exercise and diet. suitable to the prescription. Okay. Diagnostic Acquisitions Limited, a company which is in the supply of medicines and medical equipments, wants to add the delivery and consultations or counseling business to its fold, and it's looking to acquire Diligent. Okay. I'll let you have a minute for this to sink in. It's a very relevant business in the current times, right? People booking online doctor consultations, delivery of medicines, also someone giving a health counselor who can guide on exercise and the diets. Okay, this is one fact. The other basis of facts that are given are the current shareholding pattern of Diligent is uh, Chandrakant Bakshi, who has 20,000 shares of rupee 1 each, 1 rupee shares. Okay. Naman Bakshi, who has 50,000 shares of rupee 1 each. And Mitali Bakshi, who has 30,000 shares of rupee 1 each. So the total here works out to 1 lakh shares of 1 rupee each, which is like 1 lakh. So the capital of the company, the paid up capital of the company currently is 1 lakh. Uh, so not Diligent, this is wrong. It should be dominant. It should be Diagnostics. So Diagnostics is looking to acquire 80% stake in Diligent at a valuation of 20 crore rupees. And now post acquisition, the plan is that the current directors Naman and Vitali Bakshi will continue to run the company and will become employees of the diagnostic acquisitions of the acquirer. Okay, I will let you look at the facts here for a minute. 20 crores is the valuation of the company. Current number of shares is 1 lakh. The acquirer is looking to acquire 80% stake in the company. These are the facts. Okay. And it is planned that these two directors, there are currently two directors, Naman and Vitali Bakshi, and these people will become employees of the acquirer after the acquisition. Okay. Now these are the questions we have. On behalf of Diligent, for some reason it is not showing the correct slide here. Here, this is the correct slide. So on behalf of Diagnostic, which is the acquirer, what care will you take for inserting terms in the term sheet? What are you going to put in the term sheet? Something that is very typical for this business or acquisition. What will you think of putting in the term sheet? A couple of points, if people can say. What will you put as a term in the term sheet? Anyone would like to venture on this? Just a couple of terms that you can indicate. A couple of terms that you will want to put in the term sheet where Diagnostic is acquiring 80% stake. That Mitali and Nitesh would continue to work. Yeah. Permissions and certifications needed for running a diagnostic company will not form a part of the term sheet. Directors would continue as employees in the acquired company. Yes, very much. That will be the one of the terms. That post acquisition they are supposed to be. Other than that, what else will you say? Other than them, being founder vesting, since they want the promoters to stay in business. Very good, Neha. There can be founder vesting. There can also be lock-ins. Okay, because these people are still going to hold 20% stake. The founders will still have a 20% stake in the business, which is, if not uh, very high, it's not really small either. So they will want these people to continue to have stake, not just become the employees. They will continue to have a stake in the business. They would want to these people to continue to have a stake so that they are focused on the growth of the business. Non-compete, yes, you will have non-compete terms also in the term sheet. So you will state that they should not start new businesses. Okay. But at the term sheet stage, more relevance is the exclusivity, Sunil or Pratyush. Okay. Because you still haven't purchased the business at that stage. So you cannot bind them into non-compete at that particular point of time because you're still only negotiating. You haven't purchased. Okay. So you can put that as an intended term that is going to happen on, when the transaction document is signed, but that will definitely not be binding. But certainly exclusivity can be made a binding term, as in the founder should not go and approach another acquirers and negotiate with them and say that now you come in at a valuation of 25 crores, okay, and try to negotiate the price, and then again come back to diagnostic and say that look, someone else is offering 25, are you willing to offer 30 or we get sold to them. That kind of business will be prevented, okay, by exclusivity clauses, and exclusivity clauses can be made binding for a certain period of time until the validity of the term sheet. Right of first offer, right of first refusal. Yes, you will put that in the term sheet for sure. Anti dilution also you will put it in the term sheet. All of those things will be in the term sheet for sure, although they will not be binding clauses. Dividends for equity shares if you are investing in equity. So that's one of the things that's relevant, guys, isn't it? Are you going to buy the shares of these people, or are you going to subscribe to new shares? And you will say that what are the new shares you are going to subscribe to? Are these equity? Are these preference? If it is preference, then you come at question of dividends. For equity, you can't have guaranteed dividends. That's just not in the nature of the security. Okay. So these are the terms you will have in the term sheet. Very good. Management rights, how many directors can be appointed by whom? Yes, all of these will be there in the term sheet. Very good. That's a good number of things. But here we are looking at what will be, you are a lawyer for diagnostic. So, you will ensure certain things. And one of the things, like I just said, is to ensure that the founders don't give up their stake or they don't sell their stake. So ROFO, ROFR, all of these things will be there. Exclusivity will be there, which you want to make sure that they don't go shopping with other acquirers, right? What are the few things that diagnostic should focus on while conducting the due diligence? What do you want to check now for this company? What will you check for this company? It is incorporated in November 2017. Uh, Due diligence, you are not going to be looking at non-compete clauses for due diligence, Amal. What are you going to be looking at for due diligence? Yeah, you will look at financial accounts, isn't it? A November 2017 incorporated company, it hasn't completed 3 years of its operation. It's showing a valuation of 20 crores. How exactly is it doing that? Right? You want to look at that. What is it earning from where? Okay. What is it spending on? What are the kind of contracts that it has with the doctors which are providing consultation, with the counselors who are providing advice, with the people who are delivering prescription medicines, with the suppliers who are going to be supplying the medicines to them. All of these things you will check, right? So that's related to their business and their financial accounts. Okay. Yeah. So what do we have to check? If the licenses of doctors and pharmacies. So that you will check the contracts, Uma. You will check the contracts to ensure that those doctors or the pharmacists have proper licenses that this entity is entering into contracts with. Okay. How can this acquisition be carried out? So what do you recommend? Should it be subscription? Should it be purchase? 80-20% stake is going to happen at a valuation of 20 crore. Should it be subscription? Should it be purchase? It should be purchase. Why? Neha says it should be subscription. Now I'll have to ask, okay, why purchase, Uma? Why purchase? And Neha, why subscription? It'll be great if you guys can unmute and speak. Purchase because we're getting a higher stake. Neha, why subscription? Well, you can get a higher stake even by subscription, Uma.
Ma'am, I think, ma'am, am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible.
Ma'am, I think because of the issue of valuation, and if we want I mean, I think Naman and Mitali's stake to remain at least a little like them to have some sufficient stake, then I think we'll have to issue more shares rather than diluting their stake, because the lesser it is, then the founder vesting clause will be problematic, because there will be no incentive. I mean, that's what I feel. There will be no incentive if in the present valuation, present authorized capital, if we ask them, they will not be incentivized.
It's a very good point. Okay, so just think of that. When it's a subscription, the money is going to the company, not to the founders.
Yes,
So they still have
exactly.
stake in the company.
Yes, ma'am.
And they want to, their money is still there in the company, although their stake is going down. That's the point. So they are not going to get any money. Okay, if they want to get money, they'll have to stay on. So very good point, Neha. Okay, Uma, purchase. See, purchase becomes relevant because you have far lesser number of compliances to take care of, and you want to move things really, really fast. Okay, so the thing is, although you pay some money to the founders or the promoters for their stake for purchasing their shares, still their share or their stake is not eliminated in it, right? So you will have those 1 lakh shares remain as it is, but the number of shares that remains with them will now have a very higher value because it is 20 crores for 1 lakh shares. Okay, Neha, in your case, if it issues, let's say, 2 lakh more shares, then again, whatever number of shares that they are holding will have a lesser value in terms of the valuation of business. But here, even if their stake goes down and gets diluted to 1/10 of whatever they are holding, each share has a very high value because it's a 20 crore business divided into 1 lakh shares. Okay, if you bring in new shares, it's a 20 crore business now divided into 3 lakh shares. So even if the number of shares is higher, the value of each share becomes relevant, right? So that is what. So you can choose either, okay, depending upon what your what your considerations are or what your factors are. You want things to move really, really fast, you can go for purchase also, because far lesser number of formalities that are required to be done for purchase rather than an additional subscription. Now, What will be the transaction documents that will be entered into for your chosen method? We already saw that for a share purchase, it will be the share purchase agreement and a share transfer form. More or less, that's about it. You will have backing documents that are there for share subscription. You will have lots of different things because you will have share subscription and shareholders agreement. You will have board resolutions at each stages. You will have special resolutions at each stages. You will have an offer come application form. You will have a report that is filed with the ROC. All of these things, a return of allotments that is filed with the ROC. Okay, you will have to take care of all of those things. So that's the compliance as we cover as well for the chosen method. Okay, you don't have any filings in transfer. In subscription, you have filings at lots of different stages. Okay. Any questions on this? Where do we discuss these kinds of exercises? Here. And I'm pretty sure people who are students are actually well aware of this program that we have of M&A, institutional finance and investment laws, okay, including PE and VC transactions. And as we discussed in this exercise, or in this session, all of these things are just covered. So we signed off on BTA asset purchase agreements that are there, which is there in this course. Investment transactions like what we just did with detailed exercises on term sheets, because each stage that we have, like a term sheet, like a due diligence, drafting of share purchase, share subscription, shareholders agreements, all of this is in there. And listed company acquisitions, again, which we signed off on for this session, these are also there because these are very relevant when someone is out to acquire a listed company, or even acquire a listed company indirectly through acquiring an unlisted company. Okay, very interesting, but then that's there and it's provided for by the takeover code. Foreign direct investment, where you have non-residents acquiring your shares, okay, which is very relevant. And e-commerce has seen a lot of changes in the last year. End of 2018, beginning of 2019, it saw a lot of changes. So that is also specifically included. Mergers and demergers, someone mentioned that, because it is a complete absorption. Okay, it's not as such acquisition, but like you take over and you merge the entire company. That's also involved in that. People who are starting to leave, you may miss out something that I'm going to offer at the end. Okay, so just leave, remain here for that. Okay, it has institutional finance also, which is debt. So this is something that we developed really comprehensively, taking care of what all things an M&A or a corporate lawyer would need. It's not just just a merger or an acquisition that takes place, because it has a lot of dominating factors. You can also have institutional finance. You can have merger control, which is regulated by Competition Commission, and it's a huge area of practice by people. Tax and stamp duty related aspects. There's a whole lot of people who will be specializing in tax related aspects of business transfers and acquisitions of M&A. Uh, Intercorporate lending and investment, another something which is really, really relevant even for very small entities that takes place. Okay. Now for the offer, if you take the M&A course, which I mentioned to you about, which includes the exercises that we just did, kind of exercises that we just did, for tonight, you can get the introduction to corporate law practice, introductory course on legal writing, introduction to Companies Act, introduction to practical contract drafting, introduction to intellectual property and media law practice. All of these courses, all 5 of these courses free. but it's only available if you enroll till midnight, and then this is not going to be repeated because you're not going to have any time a situation where all 5 of these courses are offered for free. Okay, it's only for tonight for whoever enrolls into the M&A course tonight. No other course. M&A course tonight gets all 5 of these courses, which are month long free. Okay, and these all have exercises like we discussed in the session today. It each of them has 4 to 5 exercises like this in the relevant areas. Okay, plus the content that it makes available to you. So these are very, very bulky even on their own. It's like 5 months of extra words. Each of them is priced at 3,000 right now, so you will have like 15,000 worth of stuff free if you enroll in M&A tonight. Okay, but it's only till tonight midnight, and like these free things will not be repeated now, like, and it will not be repeated over any of our workshops or any of our courses. Okay, so after this, if you enroll in any of the courses, this is not available to you. You're going to have to buy it separately. Okay, so if you're looking to take this, okay, or if you're looking to tell someone to take this, then tonight is the night, because M&A's batch starts from November 1, and you can get or you can avail of all of this if you enroll tonight, right? Anyone has any questions on this or anything that we discussed today? Anyone has any specific questions? What about people who are already enrolled in the M&A course, Uma? No, you don't get this for, because it's only for tonight.
Already enrolled. I enrolled last month.
Yeah, but this is only for tonight, just for these few hours. Anyone who enrolls tonight, just for these few hours only. Okay. L&D with Mindtree is a hostile takeover. Is someone where talking about where should we look for something? What is that? Okay, what is the question here? Okay, I think I can't look there. Yeah, they are these docs in the public domain. Which docs, Sunil? Is Sunil here? L&T Mindtree. Yeah, they are in the public domain. Mindtree is a listed company. You can look at the takeover code. Excuse me, sorry. Yeah. So let me know. I'll just put my number down here in case anyone is looking to take the M&A course for tonight. Okay. Because this goes, then this goes. That's it. Okay, guys. Thank you so much for being that. I hope everyone got something out of it. And if someone wants to enroll into the M&A course, you can do that right through the website, because if the batch starts from November 1. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me, but up to midnight. Okay, guys. Bye. Have a great day. Great night, rather.